1943, Sicily. When Italian women auxiliaries were captured by American forces, they braced for the brutality their fascist commanders had warned them about instead. They were handed fresh towels, bars of soap, and shown to hot showers with unlimited water. Within days, these prisoners were eating better than they had in years, receiving medical care their own government never provided, and witnessing an abundance that shattered everything Mussolini had told them about the weak, starving Americans. How does hot water and a bar of soap destroy a person's entire belief system? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. In the summer of 1943, Italy was falling apart. The war had been going on for 3 years, and everything was running out. In the small towns and big cities alike, people stood in long lines for bread. A single bar of soap cost more than most families could afford. When you got soap, you cut it into tiny pieces and made each piece last for weeks. Water came from wells or public fountains, and you carried it home in buckets. Hot water was something you only got if you had wood to burn, and wood was scarce too. The government told everyone that this was normal during war. Mussolini's voice came through the radio speakers in the town squares, promising that Italy would win. He said the Americans were weak and lazy. He said they were running out of food and supplies. He said that American soldiers were cowards who would run away from a real fight. The posters on the walls showed the same message. Enemy soldiers looked mean and stupid in the drawings. Italian soldiers looked strong and brave. Maria had believed these things her whole life. She was 22 years old and had grown up listening to fascist teachers in school. Her father had fought in the last war, and her brother was fighting in this one. When the army needed women to work as clerks and radio operators, Maria signed up. She felt proud wearing her gray auxiliary uniform, even though it was made from rough cloth that scratched her skin. She worked in a communications office in Sicily, writing down messages and filing papers. 2 other women worked alongside her. Julia was a farm girl from the north with strong hands and a quiet way of talking. She had joined up because the army paid more than working in the fields. Francesca came from a middle-class family in Rome. Her father was a party official, and she truly believed in everything the government said. She talked often about Italian greatness and the weakness of the enemy. The 3 women shared a small room with 4 other auxiliaries. They slept on thin mattresses on metal frames. In the morning, they washed their faces with cold water from a basin. They shared 1 small piece of soap among all 7 women. Each person got to use the soap for just a few seconds before passing it to the next person. The soap was gray and grainy, made from whatever the factories could find. It did not smell good, but it was better than nothing. By July, the situation got worse. British and American forces landed on the beaches of Sicily. The sound of guns came closer each day. The Italian and German forces tried to fight back, but everyone could see that things were going badly. Officers stopped showing up to work. Soldiers started leaving their posts. The radio brought confusing news about the government changing, Mussolini being arrested. Then the Americans came to their town. Maria and the other women were ordered to stay at their posts, but there was nowhere to run anyway. The American soldiers arrived in big trucks that looked new and clean. The soldiers looked well-fed and healthy. This was the first shock. The propaganda had shown Americans as thin and desperate, but these men looked strong. An American officer who spoke some Italian told them they were now prisoners of war. Maria felt her stomach turn cold with fear. She had heard stories about what happened to prisoners. The government radio had described terrible prison camps where people starved and froze. She thought about her mother back home and wondered if she would ever see her again. The Americans loaded Maria, Julia, Francesca, and about 30 other Italian women onto trucks. They drove for hours, then got on a ship. The ship took them across the ocean. Maria was seasick the whole time, but the Americans gave them crackers and water. After many days, they arrived in America. They traveled by train across vast empty lands that seemed to go on forever. Maria had never imagined so much space in the world. Finally, they arrived at a camp in Texas. High fences surrounded the buildings, but the buildings themselves looked new and clean. American guards, including some women in uniform, stood at the gates. The Italian women climbed down from the trucks, tired and dirty from the long journey. They had not had a real bath in weeks. Their uniforms were stiff with sweat and dust. An American woman in a crisp uniform stepped forward. She spoke through an interpreter. She said they would be taken to get cleaned up before being assigned to their barracks. The women looked at each other nervously. What did that mean? They were led into a long building. Inside was a row of shower stalls, each one separated by walls for privacy. Steam rose from somewhere, making the air warm and damp. The American woman handed each prisoner a white towel. The towel was soft and thick, bigger than any towel Maria had ever owned. Then she gave each woman a full bar of soap. Not a sliver, not a tiny piece, but a whole new bar that smelled like flowers. Maria stood there holding the towel and soap, unable to move. Julia's mouth hung open. Even Francesca, who always had something to say, was completely silent. The American woman pointed to the showers and said something in English. The interpreter explained that the water was hot and they could take as long as they needed. There was no time limit. No one would take the soap away. Maria walked to a shower stall like she was in a dream. She turned the handle and hot water poured out. Not warm, but actually hot. It kept coming and coming. She stood under it and started to cry. This was supposed to be a prison camp. These were supposed to be the enemy. But they had given her hot water, real soap, and privacy. In 3 years of serving her own country's military, she had never been treated this well. Something was very wrong, but Maria could not figure out what it was. The first morning in the camp, a bell rang at 6 o'clock. Maria woke up on a real mattress with clean white sheets. The bed had springs that did not poke through the fabric. Each woman had her own bed, her own pillow, and her own blanket. In Italy, she had shared everything. Here, she had her own space. They walked to the dining hall for breakfast. The building was huge with long tables and benches. The kitchen area gleamed with metal surfaces that looked so clean they reflected the light. American cooks stood behind serving counters, and the smell of food made Maria's stomach growl. She had not smelled anything like this in years. Each prisoner received a metal tray. The American servers put food on the tray as the line moved forward. Scrambled eggs, yellow and fluffy. 2 pieces of toast with real butter. A strip of bacon. A cup of milk, cold and fresh. Maria stared at her tray. This was more food than she normally ate in 2 days back home. Julia whispered that there must be some mistake. Francesca said nothing, but her hands shook as she carried her tray to a table. They ate slowly, afraid someone would take the food away. But no one did. When they finished, they saw other prisoners going back for more. You could get a second helping if you were still hungry. Maria thought about her mother, who had not seen butter in over a year. She thought about the children in her town who had thin arms and big eyes from not getting enough to eat. Here in this prison camp, the enemy was giving them more food than loyal Italian citizens received at home. After breakfast, a nurse came to examine all the new prisoners. She checked their teeth, looked in their ears, and listened to their hearts. She wrote down notes on a clipboard. Maria had a small cavity in one of her back teeth. The nurse scheduled her for a dentist appointment the next week. A dentist. Maria had never been to a dentist in her life. When people in her town got bad teeth, they just lived with the pain or had someone pull the tooth out. The nurse also gave each woman a bottle of vitamins. She explained through the interpreter that they should take 1 pill each day with breakfast. The pills would help make them stronger and healthier. Maria looked at the brown bottle in her hand. The American military was giving medicine to enemy prisoners to make them healthier. This made no sense at all. On the third day, they were assigned to work details. Maria and several other women were sent to work in the camp laundry. The laundry room had big metal machines that washed clothes automatically. You put dirty clothes on one end, added soap powder from a large box, and the machine did all the work. Hot water poured in from pipes in the wall. There was so much soap powder that Maria could scoop out a full cup without anyone caring. The machines hummed and churned, and when they stopped, the clothes came out cleaned out. In Italy, washing clothes meant heating water over a fire, scrubbing each piece by hand on a washboard, and hanging everything to dry. It took a whole day of hard work. Here, the machines did it in less than an hour. The American supervisor showed them which buttons to push, and then left them alone to work. She trusted them not to break anything or cause trouble. During their lunch break, something happened that Maria would never forget. A truck pulled up outside the dining hall. The side of the truck had red and white words painted on it and a picture of a bottle. American soldiers unloaded wooden crates from the back. Inside the crates were glass bottles filled with dark brown liquid and ice. The supervisor told them these were bottles of Coca-Cola, a sweet drink that Americans loved. Each prisoner could have one, ice cold, for free. Maria held the cold bottle in her hand. Little drops of water ran down the outside of the glass. She had never had ice in a drink before. Ice was something rich people had in the old days before the war. She took a sip. The drink was sweet, fizzy, and cold. It tasted like nothing she had ever experienced. She drank it slowly, wanting it to last forever. Julia laughed out loud, something Maria had not heard her do since they were captured. Even Francesca smiled a little. That night, they were each given supplies by a Red Cross worker. The woman handed out small packages with sanitary napkins, toothbrushes, toothpaste, combs, and hand cream. She gave these items without any embarrassment or shame, as if it was perfectly normal to make sure prisoners had what they needed. In Italy, you could not find these things in stores, even if you had money. Women used old rags and washed them out. Many people had lost most of their teeth because toothbrushes and toothpaste disappeared years ago. Maria wrote a letter home to her mother. The Americans let prisoners write letters, though they read them first to make sure no one was sharing military secrets. Maria tried to explain what was happening, but she knew her mother would not believe it. She wrote about the hot water and the soap. She wrote about food and vitamins. She wrote that she was healthy and being treated well. She did not write about the confusion growing in her mind, or the questions that kept her awake at night. The American women guards walked through the camp in their neat uniforms. Their hair was curled and pinned. Some wore red lipstick. Their shoes were polished and had no holes. They had small wristwatches and carried clean handkerchiefs. They looked like movie stars compared to the Italian women in their faded, rough uniforms. These American women had everything, and their country was fighting a war on two sides of the world. How was this possible? Late at night, after the lights were supposed to be out, the Italian women whispered to each other in the darkness. Julia said her uncle had told her that America was falling apart and begging for peace. But that was clearly a lie. Francesca, who had believed so strongly in everything the fascist government said, spoke in a small, uncertain voice. She said she did not understand how the losing side could live like this. Another woman said maybe Italy was not on the winning side after all. Maybe it never had been. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maria lay in her clean bed under her warm blanket and stared at the ceiling. Everything she had been taught was turning upside down. The enemy was not cruel. The enemy was not starving. The enemy had so much abundance that they could give it away to prisoners without thinking twice. If the government had lied about this, what else had they lied about? The question scared her more than any battle or any bomb. November arrived, and with it came a change in the weather. The Texas heat faded, and cooler days reminded Maria of autumn back home. The guards put up decorations around the camp. Orange paper pumpkins hung in the dining hall. Someone painted a turkey on the window of the main office. The Americans were preparing for a holiday called Thanksgiving. Maria had heard of this holiday, but did not know much about it. The interpreter explained that it was a day when Americans gave thanks for good harvests and blessings. Families gathered together to eat a big meal. The interpreter said that the camp commander wanted the prisoners to have a proper Thanksgiving dinner too, just like American families would have. Francesca laughed bitterly when she heard this. She said it was probably propaganda, a trick to make them grateful to their captors. But Maria noticed that Francesca's voice did not sound as certain as it used to. The constant kindness was wearing down her beliefs, bit by bit, day by day. The day before Thanksgiving, the kitchen staff worked for hours preparing food. The prisoners could smell roasting meat throughout the whole camp. That night, Maria could barely sleep. She kept thinking about the meals back home, where her family stretched a small piece of meat across a week, adding it to watery soup to make it last. Her brother, if he was still alive, was probably eating hard bread and whatever he could find. Her mother was certainly hungry. And here Maria was, about to eat a feast. Thanksgiving morning came bright and cold. The prisoners were told they did not have to work that day. At noon, they walked to the dining hall. Inside, the tables had white paper tablecloths. There were real cloth napkins at each place. The smell of roasted turkey filled the air, rich and overwhelming. The servers brought out the food on big platters. Whole roasted turkeys, golden brown and glistening. Mounds of mashed potatoes with butter melting on top. Stuffing made with bread and herbs. Green beans cooked with bits of bacon. Cranberry sauce, bright red and sweet. Gravy in metal boats that you could pour over everything. And rolls, soft white rolls that were still warm from the oven. Maria sat down at her place and stared at her empty plate. The American guards invited the prisoners to serve themselves as much as they wanted. Women began passing the platters, putting food on their plates. Maria watched her plate fill up with more food than she had seen in one place since before the war started. The turkey was so tender it fell apart when she touched it with her fork. The mashed potatoes were creamy and smooth. Everything tasted like something from a dream. Halfway through the meal, one of the American guards, a woman named Sarah who had always been kind, came to sit with the Italian prisoners. She spoke some Italian, learned from her grandmother who had come from Naples. Sarah showed the women pictures from her wallet. Her family is back in Ohio. Her mother and father are standing in front of a nice house with a yard. Her little nephew is on a bicycle. Everyone in the pictures looked healthy and well-fed and happy. Sarah told them about her family's Thanksgiving tradition. Every year they invited people who had nowhere else to go. Neighbors who were alone. Strangers who needed a meal. Sarah said that sharing food with others was important, even if those others were different from you. Even if they had been enemies. She looked at Maria when she said this, and her eyes were warm and genuine. Something broke inside Maria at that moment. She started crying and could not stop. Julia put an arm around her shoulders. Other women were crying too. These were not tears of sadness, but tears of understanding, of shame, of relief, of confusion all mixed together. They were tears that came from realizing that everything you believed about the world was wrong. That night, Maria sat on her bed with a small notebook the Red Cross had given her. She began to write, trying to make sense of the storm in her mind. She wrote that her government had told her America was weak and poor and falling apart. But America had so much abundance that they could give a feast to prisoners, to enemies, to people who had fought against them. Her government had told her that Americans were cruel and heartless. But these Americans treated her better than her own officers ever had. Better than her own government had treated its citizens. She wrote that she had been given soap as if it cost nothing, as if there was an endless supply. Back home, her mother saved tiny slivers of soap for months, combining them together to make them last longer. She wrote about the hot water that never ran out, the clean towels that were replaced twice a week, the food that kept coming meal after meal. She wrote about the dentist fixing her tooth, about the vitamins to make her strong, about the guard named Sarah, who showed her family pictures and talked to her like a human being. Maria realized that power was not what she had been taught. Real power was not about making speeches or waving flags or forcing people to obey. Real power was having so much that you could give it away without thinking twice. Real power was being so secure that you could treat your enemies with dignity and kindness. The fascist government had told everyone that strength meant being hard and cruel and taking what you wanted. But America's strength came from having more than enough, from building systems that worked, from treating people like they mattered. She thought about all the propaganda she had believed. The posters showing weak American soldiers. The radio broadcasts describing American suffering and chaos. The teachers who said democracy made countries soft and vulnerable. All lies. Every single word had been a lie. The strong fascist empire could not even provide soap to its own soldiers, while the soft democracy gave soap and hot water and turkey dinners to captured enemies. Francesca came to sit beside Maria on the bed. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Francesca said quietly that her father had been wrong. The party had been wrong. Everything had been wrong. She said she felt like she had been asleep her whole life and was just now waking up. She said she was angry at being lied to, but also angry at herself for believing the lies so easily. Maria understood exactly what she meant. They had wanted to believe in Italian greatness so badly that they had not questioned the obvious holes in the story. They had wanted to feel superior to others so much that they had accepted claims that made no sense. Now sitting in an American prison camp, eating better than free citizens back home, the truth was impossible to ignore. The real lesson was not about hot water or soap or turkey. The real lesson was about human dignity. The Americans saw them as people first and enemies second. The fascist government had seen its own citizens as tools to be used and discarded. A government that could not provide basic necessities to its people had no right to claim greatness. A country that hoarded what little it had while leaders lived in luxury was not strong. It was hollow and fragile and built on lies. Maria closed her notebook and lay down on her clean sheets. Tomorrow she would wake up and eat breakfast and go to work and live another day as a prisoner of war. But she was not the same person who had arrived at this camp 3 months ago. That person had died. Someone new was being born. Someone who had learned that the world was not what she had been told, and that sometimes your enemies teach you more truth than your friends ever did. The war ended in the spring of 1945. Germany surrendered first, then Japan a few months later. The prisoners in the Texas camp heard the news over loudspeakers. Some women cried with relief. Others felt strange and confused, not sure what to feel. Maria had been in the camp for almost 2 years. It had become familiar, almost comfortable. Now she would have to leave and face whatever waited for her back home. The American military arranged ships to take the Italian prisoners back across the ocean. Before they left, the camp gave each woman a care package. Inside were bars of soap, still wrapped in paper, toothbrushes and toothpaste, small bottles of shampoo, packages of vitamins. Maria packed these items carefully in the small bag she was allowed to bring. She also had letters from Sarah, the guard who had become something like a friend. Sarah had written down her address in Ohio and told Maria to write if she ever needed anything. The ship journey took weeks. The women talked about what they would find when they got home. Would their families still be alive? Would their houses still be standing? What would Italy look like after all these years of war? Maria thought about her mother and wondered if she would recognize her own daughter. Maria had changed so much, not just on the outside, but deep inside where no one could see. They arrived in Naples in June. The city was broken. Buildings stood with walls missing, showing the rooms inside like dollhouses. Piles of rubble filled the streets. Children with dirty faces and thin bodies ran between the ruins, begging for food. Women in black mourning clothes picked through the wreckage, looking for anything useful. The smell of smoke and rot hung in the air. Maria walked through the streets in shock. She had known the war was bad, but seeing it was different from imagining it. This was worse than anything she had pictured in her mind. The contrast between this destroyed city and the clean, organized camp in Texas made her feel sick to her stomach. It was like traveling between two different worlds, two different versions of reality. She made her way to the train station to travel to her hometown. The trains were running again, but barely. The cars were old and damaged. Windows were broken and covered with boards. The seats were torn and dirty. Maria sat on a wooden bench and held her bag close to her chest, protecting the soap and other supplies inside. Around her, people looked exhausted and defeated. Their clothes hung loose on bodies that had lost too much weight. Their eyes were empty and sad. The train moved slowly through the countryside. Maria looked out the cracked window at fields that had not been planted, farms with burned barns, towns with churches that had lost their roofs. Everything looked gray and broken and tired. She thought about the green fields of Texas, the roads that were smooth and well-maintained, the buildings that stood straight and strong. The difference was so enormous that it hurt to think about. Her mother was waiting at the small station in their town. She looked old, much older than she should have. Her hair had gone completely white. Her dress was patched and mended in a dozen places. When she saw Maria, she cried and grabbed her and held her tight. Maria could feel how thin her mother had become, just skin and bones under the worn fabric. They walked to the family house. It was still standing, which was more than many people could say, but it was damaged. Part of the roof had holes covered with tin sheets. The windows had cracks sealed with rags. Inside, the furniture was mostly gone, probably burned for heat during the cold winters. The few pieces that remained were broken and repaired with rope and wire. That first night, Maria gave her mother one of the bars of soap from her bag. Her mother held it in her hands like it was made of gold. She smelled it and closed her eyes. She said she had forgotten what real soap smelled like. She said they would cut it into small pieces and make it last for months. Maria wanted to tell her that in America, soap was everywhere, that people used a whole bar in a week without thinking about it. But she said nothing. The truth would sound too much like a fairy tale. Over the following weeks and months, Maria learned what had happened while she was gone. Her brother had died in North Africa. Her father had died during a bombing raid. Half the young men from their town never came back. The ones who did return were broken in body or spirit or both. There was no food in the stores, no medicine in the pharmacy, no hope in people's faces. Maria found work helping to rebuild the town. She was stronger than most women because of the vitamins and good food she had received in the camp. She worked hard, carrying stones and mixing mortar. In the evenings, she sat with her mother and talked about the future. She told her mother stories about America, about the abundance and the kindness and the systems that worked. Her mother listened but found it hard to believe that Maria became known in the town as someone who understood how things could be different. When the new democratic government began forming, she attended meetings. She spoke about what she had seen, about how democracy and freedom could create prosperity instead of destroying it. Some people listened. Others were too tired or too broken to care. But slowly, over years, things began to change. She married a man who had also been a prisoner of war, captured by the British. He had seen similar things, the same shocking contrast between what they were told and what was real. Together, they raised 3 children and told them about the importance of truth, of questioning what the government says, of never blindly following leaders who promise easy answers. They taught their children that real strength comes from taking care of people, not from conquering them. Maria kept the last bar of soap from America for the rest of her life. She never used it. It sat on a shelf in her house, wrapped in its paper, a reminder of the moment when everything she believed had crumbled and something new had taken its place. When her grandchildren asked about it, she told them the whole story. She told them about the hot water that never stopped running, about the turkey dinner served to enemies, about the American guard who had shown her family pictures and treated her like a human being. In her old age, Maria would sit in her chair and think about those 2 years in Texas. She would think about how strange it was that she had to become a prisoner to become free. She had been captured by the enemy and treated better than her own government had ever treated her. She had lost the war but won something more valuable, the truth about power and dignity, and what it means to be strong. She would tell anyone who would listen that wealth is not just about money in a bank. Wealth is hot water for everyone. Wealth is soap that does not run out. Wealth is treating people with respect even when you do not have to. She learned in captivity that the richest prison in the world had more humanity than the poorest empire. The Americans did not defeat Italy with bombs or bullets alone. They defeated it by showing that everything the fascists had promised was a lie, and they showed it with something as simple as unlimited hot water, clean towels, and bars of soap that smelled like flowers. That was the real lesson. That was what changed everything. Not military might, but the quiet power of abundance and dignity, given freely even to those who had been enemies. Maria carried that lesson until the day she died, and she made sure her children and grandchildren carried it too, so they would never again fall for the lies of those who promise greatness while delivering only scarcity and shame. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.